My mother-in-law slid my plate away from me, right there at the dinner table, in front of every single person in that room. My husband didn't say a word. I stood up slowly, picked up my purse, and walked toward the door. They thought that was the end of it. They had no idea what was sitting in a sealed envelope at a lawyer's office across town. My name is Danielle Carter, and I'm 34 years old. I work as a hospital administrative coordinator. I schedule appointments, manage records, keep things moving behind the scenes. It's not the kind of job that impresses people at dinner parties, but I show up every single day and I do it well. That's always been enough for me. When I married my husband, I stepped into a world that felt like it ran on a different set of rules. His family owns a small construction company in our town. They've built a reputation over the years and they carry it like a shield. From the very first time I sat at their table, I could feel his mother measuring me. Too quiet, I think she decided. Too plain, not from the right kind of background. I grew up with a mother who worked double shifts and still made sure the house felt like home. She never complained once. She taught me that dignity isn't something other people give you. You carry it yourself, even when they try to take it. So I tried with his family. I hosted holidays and stayed late to clean up. I remembered every birthday without being reminded. I helped his mother carry groceries and sat with his grandfather when everyone else wandered off. None of it moved them. The praise always found its way to Amanda, his sister, the one they measured everyone else against. I wasn't loud. I wasn't flashy. I didn't argue for space in that family. But I paid attention to everything, and I remembered every detail. And I learned early that the person nobody watches too closely is often the one who sees the most. If you've ever walked into your partner's family and felt the wall go up before you even opened your mouth, this story is for you. Subscribe if you've ever been underestimated because of where you came from. Drop your story in the comments below because you deserve to be heard. And if you believe patience can change everything, click hype. Let's keep going. It was a Sunday evening, 4 days after my husband's grandfather passed away. The whole family gathered at his parents' house for dinner. The mood was tight and strange, the way it gets when grief and money occupy the same room at the same time. The will reading was scheduled for the next morning, and every conversation seemed to be circling around it without landing. I arrived with my husband and went straight to the kitchen. I wanted to help. I wanted to do something useful with my hands. His mother looked at me and said flatly, "Just sit down. Amanda already handled the important dishes." I sat down. The table filled up quickly. There was the low hum of side conversations, the scrape of chairs, the smell of roasted chicken, and something heavier underneath it, like old wood and candle smoke. I kept my hands in my lap and listened. Then the conversation shifted. Someone mentioned the company. Someone else mentioned what the grandfather had built over 50 years. And then my brother-in-law, who has always confused loudness with humor, leaned back in his chair and said, "Well, at least we know who won't be getting anything," and looked directly at me. A few people laughed. Most just looked away. My husband stared at his plate like it had said something fascinating. Then his mother reached over, placed her hand on the back of my chair, and pushed it back slightly from the table. Deliberately, slowly, honestly, she said, loud enough for the whole table. "Tonight should be family only." I felt it land. Every eye in that room moved toward me. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I picked up my purse, pushed my chair in behind me, and walked toward the hallway. As I passed the doorway, I heard Amanda's voice, low but perfectly timed. "Good. One less person trying to claim Grandpa's money." I stopped. I turned back once. "I'll see you all tomorrow morning," I said. They laughed. That confident, dismissive kind of laugh that assumes the story is already over. It wasn't over. It had barely begun. My husband called that night. I answered on the second ring. He didn't lead with an apology. He told me his mother was just stressed, that the whole family was emotional, and that I should try not to take it personally. Then he said, very carefully, that maybe it would be better if I skipped the will reading in the morning, just to avoid tension, he said, just to keep things smooth. I told him I would be there. My voice didn't shake. I meant it completely. The next morning, I arrived at the lawyer's office before most of the family. The waiting room smelled like old carpet and recycled air. I took a seat near the window and kept my coat on. Relatives filtered in slowly, speaking in low voices that got louder once Amanda arrived. She walked in like someone who had already received good news and was just waiting for the paperwork. She spotted me near the window and turned to a group of cousins. Without lowering her voice, "Danielle's just here out of curiosity. She knows this doesn't involve her." Heads nodded. Someone murmured agreement. I looked at the window and kept my breathing steady. Before the reading started, I stepped into the hallway to get water from the small table near the entrance. That's when I heard his mother's voice through a door that wasn't fully closed. She was speaking to the lawyer in a firm, controlled tone. She only married into this family. She said she shouldn't be included in anything important here. I stood completely still. I let the words settle. Then I straightened my back, walked to the water table, filled a small cup, and returned to my seat. I thought about the grandfather. He was a quiet man, the kind of quiet that comes from having lived long enough to stop needing to prove things. In a family full of noise and positioning, he had always spoken to me like I was simply a person worth talking to. That had meant more than any of them understood. I held on to that as the room filled, and the clock on the wall marked the slow minutes before the lawyer walked in. I won't pretend I wasn't nervous sitting in that room, but I knew something the rest of them didn't. And that knowledge sat inside me like a stone, steady and heavy and impossible to move. During the years I'd been part of that family, the grandfather and I had carved out small pockets of conversation that no one else seemed to want with him. He was in his late 80s and sharp in ways people underestimated. While everyone else talked around him, I sat beside him. I asked about his life before the company, before the town knew his name. He told me stories and I actually listened. One evening, about 7 months before he passed, he asked me something I didn't expect. He asked me what I thought it meant to leave something behind that actually mattered. Not money specifically, something that mattered. We talked for a long time at the kitchen table while the rest of the family watched television in the other room. Before I left that night, he mentioned a sealed envelope he had already given to his lawyer. He didn't explain the contents. He only said that he had made a decision he felt clear about, and that he hoped I would trust him. He asked me to keep our conversation private. I told him I would, and I did. I kept that promise through months of small I kept it while Amanda was praised at every table. I kept it while my husband stayed quiet when he should have spoken. Now the promise was about to become something visible, and every person in that room was about to understand something that I had known quietly for a very long time. A cousin named Rachel sat down beside me just before the lawyer entered. Rachel was the one the family called difficult, the one who asked uncomfortable questions at gatherings and never pretended to agree when she didn't. I had always liked her for exactly that reason. She chose the seat next to me on purpose, and I felt that choice like a small, warm weight against the cold of the room. She leaned close and said quietly, "Don't let them rattle you. Grandpa saw more than they think." I looked at her. She held my gaze steady. She told me that the grandfather had spoken to her once, not long before he got sick, about how tired he was of watching his family treat loyalty like it was worth less than blood. He had watched Danielle work quietly in the background while others took credit and space. He had noticed. He told Rachel directly that he had noticed. Across the room, Amanda and his mother sat close together. Amanda was already talking in a low voice about what changes she'd want to make to the lakeside property. As though the conversation was a formality, she was already past. His mother sat beside her with the composed expression of someone expecting confirmation, not news. I watched the lawyer. Since entering the room, he had glanced in my direction 4 times. Not toward Amanda, not toward his mother, toward me. Rachel reached over and pressed her hand over mine once, briefly, and said nothing else. The room hummed with low voices and misplaced certainty. Then the lawyer set his folder on the table, looked at the room over the top of his glasses, and cleared his throat. Every conversation stopped at once. He started at the beginning of the document, reading in a measured, professional tone that gave nothing away. A modest amount to one nephew, a piece of property equipment to a son, a sentimental item to a grandchild. Amanda sat perfectly still with her hands folded, the way people do when they're performing patience. They don't actually feel. The lawyer turned a page. He paused. He said my name. Danielle Carter. The room didn't gasp. It just stopped. Every sound, every breath, every small movement halted like someone had pressed a button. The lawyer read clearly. The grandfather had designated his private lakeside property and a significant investment account to me, effective immediately upon his passing. The clause had been drafted and notarized 6 months prior. There was no ambiguity in the language. His mother spoke first. That has to be a mistake. The lawyer looked up without expression. No mistake, he said. This clause was added 6 months ago, and it was reviewed and confirmed at that time. Amanda's voice came out sharp and fast. She worked her way into his life on purpose. She manipulated an old man who didn't know what he was signing. I looked at her directly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask for it. I said. The lawyer set the document down and explained that a personal letter had been attached to the clause by the grandfather himself. He read the relevant portion aloud. In the letter, the grandfather wrote that he had watched his family treat him like a future transaction for too many years. He wrote that Danielle was the only person who had sat with him without wanting something in return, who had asked about his life and meant the question. He wanted the property and the account to go to someone who understood that people were not assets to be managed. The room absorbed that, in complete silence. Amanda stared at the table. His mother turned toward the window. The relatives who had laughed at me the night before sat with the particular stillness of people confronting something they can't undo. My husband looked at me from across the room, and I watched the embarrassment move across his face slowly, like weather. I thanked the lawyer. I signed where he indicated. I did not celebrate Rachel, and I walked out of the building together into a morning that felt sharper and cleaner than the room. We had just left. I didn't feel what I expected to feel. There was no rush of victory, no heat of satisfaction. There was just a quiet that settled around me like something I had been waiting to feel for a very long time. Stillness, the real kind. My husband found me in the parking lot. He looked smaller outside the building, away from the family arrangement that usually held him up. He said he was sorry. He said he should have spoken up at dinner, and long before that, his voice was low and genuine, and I believed he meant the words even as I understood they had arrived too late to change what the silence had already cost. I told him, respect should never depend on what's written in a will. He didn't answer right away. I think that was the right response from him. The rest of the family left in small clusters, eyes down, conversations quiet. The same people who had shifted my chair away from the table the night before couldn't hold my gaze in a parking lot the next morning. I didn't point that out. I didn't need to. A week later, I drove to the lakeside property by myself. I parked on the gravel path and walked down toward the water. The air was cold and smelled like pine and still water in early winter. The surface of the lake was flat and gray and completely undisturbed. I stood at the edge for a long time. I thought about an old man who chose me, when no one else in that family thought I was worth choosing. The quiet ones at the table, the ones who listen without making noise about it. Sometimes those are the ones who see everything most clearly. He saw me, and in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. If you've ever been made to feel like a guest in a family you were supposed to belong to, then you already know the particular loneliness of that silence. You know what it costs to keep your composure when someone takes your seat at the table and expects you to disappear quietly? Have you ever been underestimated in a moment that truly mattered? Share your story in the comments. I read every single one. And this community is built on voices exactly like yours. Subscribe to stay with people who refuse to be made invisible. No matter how many times someone tries, and click hype to help this story reach someone who needs to hear it today. Did this story land for you? Tell me in the comments. And share it with someone who's been sitting quietly at the wrong table for too long. Click hype to push this story further, because every person in this community deserves to be heard. Thank you for being here. What you do here, watching, sharing, and speaking up, it matters more than you know.